Turbo Terry Flanagan successfully defended his WBO Lightweight Championship against Petrov in a fight that became quite controversial in light of the scoring that the three judges turned in. Personally, I had this fight a draw. I thought that in spite of the fact that Flanagan was doing a fairly good job at boxing at range as well as clinching Petrov on the inside in order to try and disrupt Petrov's rhythm. I don't think that Petrov's rhythm was exceptionally disrupted for a particularly long time. I think that Petrov did pretty good work on the inside, especially to the body. He landed quite a few clean punches on the inside, both to the body as well as to the head. There were occasions where he was lunging in a bit too much from the outside, but I thought that he did, at the very least, enough to get a draw. I could have very easily seen him winning the fight as well. I mean, of course, I had it a draw, so one round either way, either fighter wins. But for the judges to turn in cards of 120, 108, 118, 110, and 116, 112 is absolute bullshit as far as I'm concerned. The 116, 112, at the very least, I could see being realistic for Terry Flanagan. But for anybody to score that fight a shutout or to score it 10 rounds or 2, I think is absolute insanity. I think, they were basically watching Flanagan and not watching the fight. They're watching one fighter rather than watching the fight. They were watching what Flanagan was doing. I guess they liked the way his fucking haircut was and they liked his trunks or some shit. But they weren't actually watching the damn fight, which is really unfortunate because it was actually a reasonably competitive fight, albeit not necessarily an exciting one. Matter of fact, I mean, really, the referee could have probably deducted the point from Flanagan for as much fucking clinching as he was doing, because he did quite a bit of it, and that was one of his primary modes of defense. It wasn't so much that he had this great head movement or torso movement or foot movement, as a matter of fact. He did pretty good at keeping distance on occasion, as I mentioned before, but once Petrov was inside, a lot of the ideas that Flanagan had insofar as both defensively and offensively, I think, largely went out the window. So while this is one of the more solid wins, really, on Flanagan's record, considering the fact that his record hasn't been particularly deep, at the very least since the Jose Zepeda fight, which itself was a retirement since, or it was listed as a retirement. Probably should have been a no contest, considering Zepeda had that freak-ass injury of dislocating his damn shoulder in the middle of the fight. A fight that Zepeda was really winning up until that point. Flanagan is, to me, the weakest champion by far. Linares will beat him. Garcia would beat him. Easter would beat him. They're talking about him versus Felix Verdejo, and I wouldn't necessarily completely count Verdejo out of that fight, in spite of the fact that I really think Verdejo isn't that good. I think he's one of these guys that, kind of like Flanagan, it relies very much on you being on the outside at all times. He's way too much of an amateur, with an amateur style. It's about punch and move, stick and move, stick and move, but if you get anywhere near the inside of him, he completely doesn't know what the hell to do with you. And I don't even necessarily think his clinching game is as good as Flanagan's. But, I mean, he's pretty quick-handed, has pretty quick feet, so I think he was able to get away with a lot of shit in the amateurs that he can't necessarily get away with as a pro. So they've been trying to match him very carefully throughout his pro career. Outside of him, people have been talking about the possibility of Flanagan versus Vasyl Lomachenko, and I could very easily see a fight like that happening just because of the fact that as far as Bob Arum's concerned, well, it's the easiest champion that you can get at 135 pounds, and he's, I think, considerably less dangerous than Orlando Salido is, than Miguel Berchelt is, and than Jezreel Corrales is. And then on Frank Warren's side, for Terry Flanagan, if Flanagan is kind of, he's almost in a win-win situation against anybody that he fights, because the likelihood that he beats Easter, Linares, and Garcia is extremely low, because he simply isn't as good as any of them. But at the very least, with Lomachenko, you have a guy that's a smaller naturally guy, that would be trying to move up. And, Flanagan would have a height advantage, probably a reach advantage as well, and definitely a weight advantage. He's just a bigger, stronger guy than Lomachenko, or than pretty much anybody that Lomachenko's ever fought. So he may be able to potentially win that fight on size alone. Definitely not skill in that sense quite as much. But as with just about any case, there's limits to pushing that whole pound for pound stature. Eventually, you'll go up and fight a guy that's just too big and strong, and it doesn't matter how much more skilled you are than them. They're going to be able to take your shot, kind of smirk at you, and they keep keep walking you down, and keep throwing bombs at you. And even if they're not even necessarily the biggest puncher, those bombs will still, by and large, do a little bit more damage than guys that are even middling punchers at the lower weight class. Flanagan isn't really a heavy-handed guy. So I think that largely fits into Top Rank's, clamoring for that type of a fight as well. So to me, Flanagan is basically food for just about anybody that he fights. I think there's a number of lightweights that could pretty much take him out as well. I'd toss in Ray Beltran or Juan Diaz in there with him, and I think that they both would pretty much beat the shit out of Terry Flanagan. I don't think Flanagan is very good. But in any case, he managed to defend his belt. So that's one thing that you could say for him. And I think that's pretty much going to do it as far as my review for the fight goes. Hopefully, Petrov gets another title shot at some time in the future. And he's a guy that's managed to improve quite a bit since that knockout loss that he suffered to Marcos Maidana years ago. Definitely an improved fighter, and a guy that I think could potentially give some of the other guys a good bit of trouble, especially considering Mikey Garcia and Robert Easter probably aren't particularly too long for the lightweight division. I could very easily see both of them moving up at some point in the near future. So he may get a title belt at some point yet. But that's it for this one, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.